Peace and love, you beautiful wonders of the spiritual level of being. Nathan here from the spiritual level of being, and you have a spiritual level of being. We're doing a walking philosophy today, and we're going to be discussing magic. Now, while I'm outdoors, let's go discuss this wonderful world, which is full of magic. Everything that we do is, in a sense, magic. Now, me going for this walk, I choose to engage in it every day, for instance. This becomes a ritual. This in turn is magic. I say a few prayers, you say a few prayers. This in turn is magic. Putting something positive into your mind, shifting your mindset and changing your emotions, alchemy, is also magic. Now, we see this in the big propaganda machine of political opponents. They will use what? Propaganda, which in turn is magic, as it changes people's mindsets. Changing your mindset, again, is also magic. Drilling something to your head that is positive is magic. What we see on TV, the media, comes from the Greek goddess of lies and deceptions and plots and planning. And this in turn is also magic. So, the word pharmacy comes from the Greek word pharmacia, which means sorcery. Now, when you use antibiotics to go treat an ailment or sickness, this in turn is also magic. As medicine evolved through spirituality, religious practices, and again, magic, as it was sacred. Now, what we call demons originally comes from the word daemon in Greek, which means spirits, wise ones, all-knowing, those who tame. Now, when the Latin Church, the Roman Church Fathers, they would attempt to make their so-called Catholicism, which means universal, which the first universal practices of spirituality and religion were the Gnostics, who were killed off by these Latin Church Fathers, who in turn associated daemons, which were also at times aspects of the divine in certain roles, such as love, and also one's own ancestor spirits. So they associated them all with demons and associated them all with evil serpents. But before this, we would see text associating the serpent with the worm. Now, this in turn also corresponds with the aspects of life, as we start off as a sperm, and also this process of going into the female's egg, the uterus, which in turn forms creation, which evolves into the human being. Now, we also have this concept of duality, light versus darkness. This is also affected in the elements of the spiritual realm and also the physical realm in the form of light and darkness, day and night, as our ancestors would associate nighttime with predators, as predators would be more active, as would diseases, fungi, bacteria, tapeworms, for instance, so creeping into one's body in the dens of night. So this was also associated with the spiritual terms of alchemy, where one's constant engagement in negative activities and negative thoughts could also make one sick. So one being positive could also heal. So again, magic. Let's read Psalms 22. This saying is associated with Jesus saying this in the Old Testament. Some scholars have mixed feelings on this, but here we go. But I am no longer a man. I am a worm, despised and scorned by everyone. All who see me jeer at me. They stick out their tongues and shake their heads. Now, again, with daemon being referred to as all-knowing, the wise ones, this was associated with the worm, the serpent, reincarnation, life, death, rebirth. And as those who couldn't comprehend these true spiritual teachings and would only engage in religious laws would often persecute those who did. So the Latin Church Fathers would go attacking, killing off the wise ones, who they would call the serpents. They did this with the Druids. So St. Patrick killing the snakes in Ireland. This is associated with the Catholic Church killing off the Gnostics and killing off the pagan beliefs. You ever heard the saying of the enemy of God, the enemy of Jesus, the enemy of light, or even the enemy of Ra? So this all goes back to the enemy of light. So the dark deeds. So what one would result doing physical nastiness, one would say they're affected by the elements or negative spirits. These elements and negative spirits also being within oneself. So you're not separated from what is dark and what is light, as we all have the aspects and attributes of this light and darkness, of good and evil, that we can in turn enact in the world. Us humans can be like parasites. Parasites can be good. They can also be harmful. So these dualistic aspects that we see out in nature, in biology itself. Now, We in turn absorbed this, and this in turn fueled our spiritual and religious practices and ideas as we interpreted what we've seen with the world around us and what we felt from within ourselves. So this search and drive for spiritual knowledge in order to develop and make us more aware was what order caused this spark of evolution of what we see ourselves as today. And with Gnostics, we see this contribute to our divine spark, our inner goodness, our soul, yearning to seek high levels of experience. So with this battle of light and darkness, this is the turmoil within, the turmoil of Mother Nature, that we see these forces that we would comprehend as mysteries, but at the same time we wouldn't see ourselves separate as these entities from within ourselves. It wasn't until the Latin Church Fathers would cause this division and associate what is dark with Satan, as the old mystics of the old would associate the dark and light as balance. So in turn bringing balance into our lives. Now, when the Catholic Church went out persecuting a lot of the pagan beliefs and Gnostics, who they would label as heretics, they in turn would also destroy their own spiritual essence within their own religion, the esoteric knowledge, the gnosis, spiritual knowledge. Now, this was in turn to unify the Roman Empire. So, in order to convert pagans into Christianity, they would often associate pagan holidays with Christian holidays instead. So with this practice, they would slowly stamp out the old pagan beliefs in the Roman Empire, but they wouldn't persecute the Roman religions. They would only persecute religions outside of the Roman Empire. So ones that weren't in alliance with Rome. Now, if we look at a lot of the gods, they started off as spirit guides, animal-human hybrids, as we would see nature connected to us, and this involves the animals, all human. So you would find these gods a mixture of human and animal. Now, this in turn of duality, of life, death, rebirth, was also associated with the animals. So the animals being a gift to humans to eat to survive, but also in turn a gift for the animals to in turn survive. So these dualistic aspects of animals fighting each other would be viewed as the spirit guides in battle or the gods in battle. So in turn this was replicated by our own instincts of battle, of our own memories. Now, our instincts of hunting would also be attributed into these said spiritual practices and beliefs, where we recognized the need for suffering in order for another creature to live. So as humans, we become more consciously aware and would consciously act out to make a suffering of an animal less. Though this was not always the case, as some would go to extremes in the cases of sacrificing, and this would also include animal sacrificing to human sacrificing. Now again, this was seen from the dualistic concept of life and death, as death was necessary to begin life. Now, what we see today in the form of magic is mostly used in the propaganda machine. What we see in the media, the news outlets, in politicians, especially when you see sides do battle. Now, often when these, say, countries do battle, they often side with the bigger picture, as when an outside influence comes into contact and you see an organised battle between religions. So usually the same religious creeds will put aside their differences in order to launch a crusade, if you will, in order to do battle against who they view as a different belief, a different race. This whole idea of race and belief are human constructs. Now, we associate this idea of race with what we see in the animals. You would see the animals battle one another. Early humans would also, in cases, stick to their own tight-knit communities and view others as outsiders and wouldn't associate with them unless they had to, or maybe unless they had to do battle or do raiding in order to raid them, or maybe through trade, through peaceful means. But other than that, ancient humans mostly kept to their own tight-knit communities and would view others as outsiders and possibly even threats. So again, with the concept of the sun, we would associate the sun bringing light to our bodies, light to food, to the vegetables, to the trees, bringing energy, the necessary balance in order to spark life. Now the Manichaean Gnostics, they would associate fruits that were more in the sunlight as associate with fruits of light containing more of the essence of the light within them. So they would partake of these fruits and vegetables in order to absorb more light within them. So we have this old concept of light and dark being absorbed by the foods that we eat. This idea of clean and unclean food was also associated with the light and darkness, with religious concepts. That is how it evolved around. Vegetarianism evolved through spiritual practices and religion, as it was a conscious awareness of one to limit suffering. Now with this old Manichaean belief with the light being absorbed in certain food, we can also find this in ancient Hinduism and Buddhism. Now this in turn was much more aligned with the old Essene and Gnostic beliefs, as the first Christians were also vegetarian, though some Essenes and Gnostic Christians were also pescatarian. Got a fly buzzing around me. Now this is the view of fish not having a soul in it, that God simply gave them as a gift to humans in order to multiply so that humans can eat. Now we have the saying of Jesus saying, blessed is the man who eats the lion and the lion becomes like man, but cursed is the lion that eats man and becomes like man. Now this in turn is about absorbing of what you eat. So you're taking on its karma, you're taking on its evil incarnations, its evil actions, its corruption. And in turn, when you say eat this corruption, you in turn are taken into your next life, or in turn you are absorbing its impurities and in turn making it pure. So we have a mixed belief here. Now this belief can also be found in Hinduism. We have this belief with the Agori, that they would eat their bodies, as they would be absorbing their sins, so that way the soul would no longer have to suffer in its next life and it would no longer have to reincarnate, or it would reincarnate without its attributed karma. It would be cut off basically. Now again, this belief can also vary, as there's different interpretations of one's own religion. This goes for the Agori, this goes for Gnostic Christianity, as everyone's interpretations of Gnosis is different. Now Jesus also said, it doesn't matter what goes into one's mouth, but it's about what comes out of it. So this suggests that he was more lenient towards other people that would eat, say, meat, as he had different followers around him. So it seems Jesus' teachings was more universal. So it was teaching people to be more aware of what they do, what they speak of, what comes out of their mouth, how they treat others. So Jesus was encouraging others to love one another, to forgive one another, to not seek revenge. His teachings were very different for his time, especially in ancient Jerusalem. Now, the ancient Israelites were known for doing battle, for wanting war, wanting to overthrow their conquerors, from the Babylonians to the Romans. So traffic's getting a little bit louder, so I'm turning around, also getting real hassled by flies. Must be stinky out in the wetlands or something. Now, many Christians were kicked out of Jerusalem, along with a lot of Jews. They were kicked out of their hometowns and exiled into Egypt, as the Roman Empire viewed them all as rebellious. And they couldn't identify the difference between Christians and Jews, as they identified Christians as a new faction or a different faction of Judaism, and such as viewed them as rebellious Jews. Now, this is because these Christians that were exiled were Gnostic Christians of largely amounts, and also Essene Christians that viewed Jesus' death being blamed on not just the Pharisees, but the Roman Empire, being viewed as the fault of Pontius Pilate. Now, the Christians that stayed, that weren't exiled, turned around and said, look, we blame the Jewish people for the death of our Messiah. So we have a form of anti-Semitic version of Christianity here in its roots. So these Christians in turn would stay and would later become what would be known as the Christian Orthodox Church, or the Catholic Church, so Christian Orthodoxy as a whole. So ones that in turn unified with the Roman Empire, and in turn would have the Council of Nicaea, to which the laws of Catholicism, which they use today, come from, which is an authorized belief. So what Gospels were chosen were authorized to be read, and only them. So before this, we had many different scriptures of Christianity that Christians in turn would read from each other. We had many popular texts that were rejected from the Bible in turn, which were much older than the Bible. We have even more copies from the Gnostic Christians that were older, that were ultimately destroyed, that have been lost to time. And we know of their existence because of the writings from their opponents of the early church fathers, who would go out to stomp out the old mystic knowledge of old, to also steal their medicine knowledge, so that way they would be the only ones holding it, and also the knowledge of the astrological world and, well, astrology and science. So in order to control the population, as they didn't want their population to be too wise or too intelligent, otherwise they could not control over them. So the elites had to have the most education, so the education was reserved for the elites. So when the Gnostic Christians were going around teaching the poor, this was viewed as a problem. Now, the Roman Church, like the Roman Orthodoxy Church as a whole, would persecute the Gnostics, as they would view them as anti-political, as these Gnostic Christians at the time were. They viewed these evil material rulers as such, being influenced by the archons, the demiurge. Now, not all Gnostics believed in a physical demiurge, so they viewed these politicians, these material rulers, being influenced and controlled by their lower self, their ego, so unable to shine with goodness, as they haven't discovered the divine spark within them, the Christ within and the God within, their inner goodness. So when Jesus says that those who haven't discovered light, who don't shine in light, will only be in darkness. Now, with this world that is magical, the practices, rituals that we engage in is magic. The way we talk to each other, magic. The way we use words, being spells, magic. Now, it was associated with evil because of the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church. Now, this is due to the limit of accessibility to the common public, to the peasantry world, if you will, as these ones in charge always seek to cause division, so that way there's a lower society and a higher society, though their aspects of higher and lower are twisted as they're engaging in their lower self, their lower state of mind, the lower level of being. They haven't embraced their higher level of being. They haven't developed the higher level of consciousness that is in tune with all. So when we search and seek and find this inner goodness, what is good comes naturally to us. We're aware of what is evil, what is darkness, most of which many of us have suffered, have been amongst it, and thus in turn out of the darkness have found the greatest light, and now engage only in good out of conscious choice. So they do this naturally. They've been to hell and back, they've seen the darkness, they can stare at their face and understand that what is good is the ultimate truth. So shifting one's perspective, So it seems the phone just died. Had to come back home for a phone charge trip. Now I was going to say, changing our own reality, one's own perspective. This is magic. This is alchemy. Now, we've been misled to believe what lies within the spiritual knowledge, the esoteric knowledge of old, was evil, in order to stop the practice of a personal relationship with the divine, for the yearn to understand the mysteries of the world, of life. Now, this was ultimately suppressed, as the ones in charge have always feared the common people coming together. So they place little things in order to cause division. Now, the separate man is a man easily controlled, as it's divided. So we have this division. Now, when one does come together, they're able to access greater forms of knowledge. They're able to communicate. They're able to share an experience. Now, if this is done at a large scale, this is too much change, and people fear change. And thus, ones in charge also fear change, as they're all humans. We're all humans. So we're all concept of good and negative traits. Now, it's when we do the inner work, the Spirit leads us to our inner goodness that seeks higher levels of experiences, more meaningful experiences. So the love within. So peace and love, everyone. I love you all. Connect to one mind and soul. Namaste.